Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. This is the All Access Med School Admissions Podcast. Hello again, everybody. I'm your host, Christian Essman, and I'm the Senior Director of Admissions and Financial Aid here at the Med School. This is a special episode today as we're featuring a medical school in Canada who accepts U.S. applicants, by the way, so keep listening. But before we get to that, I want to give a shout out to a pre-med club that came to visit us recently. There's a student group at the University of Michigan called Psst. Check this out. During their spring break, they rent a big touring bus and take a road trip to visit a different med school just about every day during that week. So they came to Cleveland, and then they were going on to Vanderbilt in Nashville, and then on to Cincinnati, and then I think they're ending in Pittsburgh. In addition to that, the visits that they make, they try to participate in some form of volunteer activity in each city that they're visiting. It's just so cool. So I want to thank the M-Steppers for including Case Western on your spring break road trip. And this got me to thinking, if your pre-med group does something unique or cool, has a neat program, then tell me about it. And I can try to give you a shout out on a future episode, and then maybe other pre-med groups will hear your story and be inspired to try to implement something similar with their group. What do you think about that? If you want your group's activity to be featured, then send it to me at allaccess@case.edu. Also, keep your wish list of med schools coming in. And again, hit me up at allaccess@case.edu. Okay, let's get right into it. I have two wonderful guests today from Toronto that you're going to be hearing from. And so let me just tell you about them right off the bat. Dr. David Latter graduated from McGill University Medical School in 1982 and began the long, fascinating journey to where he is today. He always knew he wanted to be a surgeon and started in general surgery residency. This then led to residency in cardiothoracic and vascular surgery at McGill University, and then a clinical fellowship in heart, lung, and lung transplantation at Stanford University. One of his most interesting medical accomplishments was when he was a principal participant in the world's first living-related lung transplantation, which was between mother and daughter. That took place in 1990 when he was at Stanford. Since completing his training, he's worked as a cardiac surgeon and transplant surgeon at McGill University, at the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, and now, for the last 20 years, as a cardiac surgeon at St. Michael's Hospital, University of Toronto. Over the years, he's had a number of educational posts that include University of Toronto Cardiac Surgery Residency Program Director, Chief Examiner, Cardiac Surgery Examination Board, Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada, Vice Chair, Education Department of Surgery, University of Toronto, and now as Director of the MD Admission and Student Finances at the University of Toronto. Believe it or not, each position seems to have had a natural progression from one role to the other, and you're going to hear him talk a little bit about that when we start our conversation. The thing Dr. Latimer enjoys the most about being Director of Admissions is the opportunity to meet so many fascinating and accomplished young students who want to become a doctor, and I can relate to that. Invariably, their motives are true, with a genuine desire to do something in life that will help others, and they are all incredibly inspiring, aren't they? Dr. Latter remains very close with his wife and family of 3 grown children, and they try to do things together, such as vacationing in Cape Cod and dinners together with their significant others in the latest in vogue downtown restaurants, or just simply playing a round of golf with his family. Dr. Latter is also a former hockey dad. He went rink to rink to rink while his kids were in youth hockey. So probably once a hockey dad, always a hockey dad. Based on his bio, in my opinion, Dr. Latter is pretty big time. The other voice you'll be hearing today is that of Jesse Metcalf. Jesse is a higher education professional with 13 years of experience working in student recruitment and diversity-focused outreach. In her current role, she leads recruitment and admissions projects relating to the Faculty of Medicine's diversity statement, with an aim to increase the diversity of the student population in medicine and to foster an inclusive community for learners. Jesse is involved with the faculty's Community of Support, which is a longitudinal outreach initiative that supports students from groups that are currently underrepresented in medicine, where she acts as a personal resource on admissions to all Community of Support members. Jesse holds a BA in art history and completed her master's in education and higher education, both at the University of Toronto. With a passion for communication, Jesse really enjoys connecting with prospective students and applicants and has fun leading their MD Admissions Facebook Live Let's Chat series, so be sure to check that out their next session. Outside of her work in higher education, Jesse enjoys traveling, participating in community events in her vibrant Danforth East neighborhood, and exploring Toronto's many amazing parks with her partner and 2 young children. They are both great people, and you're going to love hearing from them. Now let me tell you a little bit about the med school. The University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine is a public institution located in the Canadian province of Ontario. It was founded in 1843, which is just like case, by the way, and is one of Canada's oldest medical institutions and is credited for some really incredible groundbreaking discoveries, such as insulin and stem cells. How about that? They have quite a reputation when it comes to the rankings, too. They are ranked as the #1 school in Canada by QS World University Rankings, the #3 med school in the world by the National Taiwan University Rankings, and the #4 med school in the world according to U.S. News and World Report. The University of Toronto's Faculty of Medicine is an integral component to one of North America's largest health sciences complexes. The faculty is a part of a network of 9 fully affiliated and 19 community-affiliated teaching hospitals and healthcare sites, as well as a myriad of community-based health units. With a catchment population of close to 5 million people, these offer students access to a broad spectrum of educational experience and an extraordinary environment for clinical care, research, and education. Their mission is to develop leaders, contribute to our communities, and improve the health of people and populations through the discovery, application, and communication of knowledge. They have 2 unique campus communities: downtown Toronto's historic St. George campus and the Mississauga campus, I hope I said that correctly, both of which place their students in the heart of Canada's largest healthcare network. Incidentally, Toronto is the largest city in Canada and one of the largest in North America. They primarily accept Canadian citizens and some international applicants, including citizens of the U.S. who meet their prerequisite requirements. And we talk about this during our conversation. For the entering class of 2019, the medical school received 3,555 applications and interviewed 636 applicants for a class size of 268. This includes students entering through the Indigenous and Black application streams as well as international students. 56.3% of their 2019 entering class was comprised of women, and just over 33% of the entering class had completed a graduate degree. Finally, I think it's worth mentioning that during my conversation with Jesse and Dr. Latter, we didn't get a chance to talk specifically about the universal access to healthcare in Canada, and I wish we had. While that's a very political and somewhat divisive topic right now in the U.S., universal access to healthcare is definitely a source of pride and a core value for the citizens of Canada. So, way to go. Okay. Let's get after it with Jesse and Dr. Latter and the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine. Hello, Jesse and Dr. Latter. Welcome to the show. It's great to have both of you here. You are my first med school interview outside the U.S., so I'm particularly excited to have both of you with me today. So thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to talk to you today.
Well, I have so many questions. I don't even know if we're going to get to all of them, but I have so many things I want to learn from about Toronto and the application process in Canada. We had a nice chat last week to kind of a pre-recording discussion, and it left me with I have so many more things I want to talk to you about. So I'm sure our listeners will have a lot of questions too. Hopefully we'll kind of answer them that they might be thinking as we go along. So I'm going to look to you to kind of help me, through this conversation too, because there's probably a lot of questions I don't know to ask. So I can't wait to do that. So I think one thing before we dive into the outline, which we kind of talked about, we're going to talk about an overview of the application process to medical schools in Canada. Then we're going to get into all things University of Toronto and curricular highlights of what a med school education looks like there at the University of Toronto. Then we'll talk about your screening process and then what the interview day entails and then what happens after the interview day. Then we'll kind of wind things down. But before we do that, I kind of want to know, you guys have unique jobs. We all have these unique jobs in admissions. And Jesse, how did you get, you're the registrar and you're in charge of registrar and enrollment management. How did you get your position there and what led you down this pathway?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of administrators in higher education sort of fell into it after finishing my undergrad here at the University of Toronto. I got a role in our engineering department, actually in the admissions office there, just a temporary role. And I sort of worked my way through admissions and into student recruitment for our undergraduate engineering programs. Did a lot of work in international recruitment. And so that was a fantastic experience.
You traveled?
Yeah. I had the opportunity to travel all over the world.
Wow.
Talk about the university, which, was a lot of fun. And then from there, found my way over to medicine. And in my current role, I've been here for about 6 years now. I'm the associate registrar for enrollment management. So I do a lot of outreach, recruitment, working with our diversity portfolios, assisting with our admissions processes and all of that as well. So it's been a really interesting and eye-opening experience being in medicine.
Oh, that's wonderful. And Dr. Latter, how did you wind up being in admissions? I mean, you have a very successful career in cardiac surgery. Tell us about your trajectory to the admissions role.
Like most things that doctors end up doing, it's almost it's hard to believe at the end of the day where you've landed. It's one step after another. But I'm a cardiac surgeon, and that takes a fair amount of my time. And during my educational pathway myself, I've spent some time at McGill University, some time at Stanford University. I was in the University of New Jersey Medical Center, and then most recently for the last 20 years here at the University of Toronto. During my time here, my academic interests have been in education, and I've had various roles starting at the hospital, and then in the cardiac surgery residency program, where I was the program director for 5 or 6 years. And, one thing led to another. At one point, I was the chief examiner for the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada in the cardiac surgery program. Then I became a vice chair of education at the Department of Surgery here at U of T. And then this most recent role, which I've been in this role for about 3 years now, as the director of admissions and student finances.
Wow. Do you have a hard time saying no?
Well, that's a great question. And I do have a rule that when a door opens, another door has to close. Yeah. Otherwise, your house gets a little drafty.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great advice. Wow. That's wonderful. These are fun jobs. These are really fun. So I've been particularly excited because in talking with you last week, I can tell we're all enthusiastic about this. And so I know we're going to have a good conversation today. Let's talk about that overview of the application process. Which one of you wants to kind of walk us through what's it like to apply to medical schools in Canada? Canadian students or Canadian applicants don't use AMCAS. So the US listeners have heard me in every other interview talk about AMCAS. In Canada, it's a different system. So which one of you wants to kind of kick that off?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you a bit of an overview. So yeah, definitely a bit of a different process. So for those who are listening in the US, you'll be very familiar with AMCAS. here in Canada, we have 17 medical schools across the country, and we don't have a national application system in the same way that exists in the US. In Ontario, the province that we are located in, we do have a provincial application center, which is called OMSAS, the Ontario Medical School Application System. So this is the application system that essentially manages the applications for all 6 of the Ontario medical schools. And it acts similarly to AMCAS in that it's sort of it's the one-stop shop where you send documentation, you do all your online applications, sending MCAT scores, all of that. And then the information is distributed to the medical schools you've applied for within Ontario. If you are applying outside of Ontario at other medical schools across Canada, typically you're applying directly to that school. So you are, engaging with the university directly, and they have their own application through their website usually, and sending materials directly to them.
Are the materials very similar, and the applications, the provincial applications, very similar to OMSAS? Do you try to communicate with each medical school to kind of say, let's make sure that we're asking for similar information? Do you know?
I say across Canada, there's a lot of commonalities in what we're looking for, and probably not that different from what you're looking for in the US. So most schools will require some form of reference letter or referee form. Many require like a supplementary sort of application that will include details about, non-academic achievements. Many will ask for some essay responses or things like that. There are definite similarities across Canada. And then within Ontario, we have tried to create some standards for the 6 Ontario med schools where we require 3 references, all using the same reference form, so that if you're applying to multiple schools in Ontario, you're submitting the same 3 reference forms for all of those programs.
Okay, so they're not like these personal letters of recommendation that a faculty member might write and say, "Dear admissions committee, I'm writing a letter today about insert applicant's name, blah, 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 blah." These are, it's a special, it's called the confidential assessment form, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, and this is actually fairly new. Over this past admission cycle, so this current cycle we're in now, this form was just introduced. So we did previously require narrative letters. So not a committee letter in the sense of those are often required for US schools, but more of an individual narrative letters from 3 different references. Now we are using this standardized form. And I think really the purpose of moving to this form was to really better identify what we're looking to pull out of these references, because we were finding that references were all over the map in terms of the information we were seeing. And and there were really different, specific qualities that the Ontario med schools agreed that we wanted to see and we wanted to measure more accurately.
So now that you've been through that a year, what are your thoughts on it now that you've had that 1 year under your belt using the CAF form?
Well, it's interesting that I've looked at thousands of reference letters. Christian, I'm sure you have as well. And at some point, your eyes sort of glaze over a little bit when you're reading how fantastic everybody is, and all these students are actually very accomplished students and really have some remarkable things to learn about them. But we found that some students would get a referee that would spend a lot of time and write this beautiful letter and would really be influential and impactful. And then unfortunately, another student would get a referee that didn't spend nearly as much time or effort, would write, spend 20 minutes late one afternoon, crafting up a very simple letter. And that would disadvantage that student. So we didn't think that was really reflective of the actual student applicant themselves. So we've just tried to standardize it a little bit. I think it's helpful, and I think we have moved in the right direction, and we'll see what the what the take up is with the other schools. But we like it. We think it's just a more level playing field for our applicants.
I think you guys might be onto something. I mean, that sounds like a great initiative. Like you said, to kind of level the playing field for all the applicants, because they never, and these are confidential, so they can't read them and know that, boy, that was a really short letter that they whipped out in the afternoon to get it sent in. Did you find, there's always a learning curve when you're implementing something new. Were you finding that letter writers were resistant or didn't know what to do? Or did it just kind of seem, was it easier for them, do you think, maybe?
Yeah, I think it was definitely easier for them. And we don't actually communicate directly with the referees, but
Right.
of the few that I have talked to in my life in the hospital and whatnot, I think most referees have really welcomed it. It gives them some structure, some format. They don't have to go on and on and on and use all sorts of adjectives. And we ask them specific questions. For instance, would this candidate, be a good physician?
Mm-hmm.
And if not, why not? So we give them a very good opportunity to give us their opinion in a fairly concise and I think hopefully more accurate fashion.
Yeah. Do the referees have to be? Are there requirements like, okay, 2 of them have to be from science instructors and 1 can be from a physician, or is it just send us 3 referee letters?
Yeah, we don't actually specify exactly what
Okay.
We encourage. We think that they should have an academic referee, of course. So that could be a professor or a supervisor. We do not allow, of course, family members or neighbors.
Right.
We have some very strict conflict of interest rules that we enforce. But we look at we value referees from coaches, from teachers, from co-workers, and we encourage them to give us a sort of a variety of referees. Now, having said that, for students that are applying for MD, PhD program, we do specifically request 3 academic referees in addition to that. That's
important. Yeah. That's really important. Jesse, you kind of touched a little bit on some of the requirements in that application, and one of them was the autobiographical sketch. Explain a little bit what that is.
Sure. So this is another common element that we share across the Ontario universities or the Ontario medical programs. And essentially, it's a form that applicants fill out through the OMSAS application. And there's different sections where they can list things such as volunteer experiences, paid work experiences, research, academic awards, scholarships, extracurricular hobbies and interests, so a whole variety of things. I think they have up to about 32 entries that they can put on there. And it's essentially just listing the activity, a little summary about the activity, when it took place, like was it, during first year of university or whatnot. And then just outlining what their role was or what the actual activity included.
Okay.
And this is something that is helpful to us in looking at, what makes them who they are outside of just what their transcripts and their MCAT scores show us, right? It gives us a bigger picture of the applicant.
Now, if I did a little homework after we spoke last week, and I found that it starts from the age, you get the time frame of age 16 to present, correct? So it's like
That's
from
right.
high school through university to present. And it's 150 character limit on each one, right? So one question that came to mind for me was, do they have to be, are you looking for a complete set? It's a little over a tweet. So are you looking for complete sentences, or can it be kind of bullet pointy? You know what I mean?
Yeah, bullet points, fine. There isn't a really strict guideline about how you fill in the sections. It's just really trying to convey the key points that you want to get across as relate to that activity. And yes, anything from the age of 16 onward is fine. Of course, we do emphasize that we want to see some recent experiences in there as well. And a lot of students will ask us, what types of experiences to see. We're not looking at a very specific set of experiences that can be quite broad. But they should really think about the quality of what they're putting on there in terms of, having some engagement that maybe was a long-term engagement that showed us a number of hours committed to this activity versus like participating in a one-day volunteer event or something like that. So students do have to think critically about what information they put there and how they present that.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. What about one question that I thought about was, what about career changers, or those that were as undergrad, they weren't necessarily thinking that medicine was going to be their calling or career choice, but life happens and some decisions changed. How does a career changer or non-traditional applicant kind of express this newfound interest in medicine in an autobiographical sketch or the brief personal essay? Is there what recommendations do you give to that kind of applicant?
Well, yeah, we definitely get quite a few of those applicants. And I think, so certainly they can list work experience as part of that autobiographical sketch, or we call it an ABS for short. They can list that on the ABS, but for the University of Toronto, because those entry points are so short and the space to describe them is so small and limited, we also allow students, or we request that students choose 3 of the activities on their ABS and actually elaborate on those in a short essay format. So these are our ABS statements. Okay. So this is a great opportunity for students to pick sort of the 3 things that they feel, most define them and in relation to their medical school application. And they then have 250 words to elaborate on those activities or achievements. And so that, would be a good opportunity for a student like that to pull that information forward.
All right. That's great.
So, Christian, the other thing I'd say about that, you're talking about this students who make sort of late career decision changes. We actually encourage that. And we have, for our prerequisites that the students have to have accomplished or completed in undergraduate school, it's quite limited. We ask for 2 full-time courses in life sciences and 1 in humanities. Wow. So if we have somebody who's, been in a music degree and decides they want to go into medicine, it's entirely possible for them to achieve those prerequisites, study, make their plans. Of course, they have to then go and do MCATs and things like that. But it's not impossible. They don't have to go back and do a whole new degree just to meet the requirements for the University of Toronto Medical School. So we actually encourage that. We think it increases our diversity of our class. We have people of many different backgrounds, academically and socially and geographically, and it's something that we actually strive for. So we like that idea.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I have to think a lot of listeners think that you need to be a science major, because I've heard that Canadian medical schools are insanely competitive to get into. So probably trying to think, what are they thinking? What are admissions people thinking? They're looking for just science majors and have to show you my prowess in the sciences. But from what you said there, David, that you do value that diversity and educational thought and background, and because that does enhance the learning environment in your class composite. So
100%.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah. Dr. Latter, can you walk us through what the timeline of the application process is? This was illuminating to me. What's that? It's slightly different than it is in the U.S.
Right. So we actually, the U.S. you have rolling timelines, and we're pretty much all coordinated together, so that in July the OMSAS system opens up. Students can log on. They make their account. They start putting in their information, demographics, and whatnot. They start getting their undergraduate programs to forward transcripts, and they get access to the what we call brief personal essays which are 4 questions that we ask of each applicant to write on. It's a brief essay, 250 words each, and submit that, and we use that to help us evaluate the applicants. And all that has to be completed by October, usually October the 2nd. It's like the first Monday of of October.
Okay.
And then it's closed, and all the material is in. Unfortunately, occasionally, some students miss the deadline, and they have all sorts of reasons, but none of them make much sense. But it's a pretty hard deadline,
Yeah.
and then we start the
it's
evaluation.
Well publicized.
Well publicized, exactly. But it's early October, and then we take October, November to start doing file reviews and making decisions about who's moving forward in the process and who's not. And it's a fairly exhaustive process because we have about 4,000 applicants per year.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to have that information in, and so we have enough time to make those file reviews and make the decisions regarding next steps.
So the interview season then is kind of like right now, right? Like is now kind of the typical interview season?
Yeah, exactly. So in fact, what's today? Today is Wednesday. We've had one set of interviews. So the interview season is basically February to March. This weekend on Saturday, we'll be interviewing 120 applicants.
Oh, wow.
And on Sunday, we'll be interviewing another 120 applicants. And so we actually have about 5.5 sessions or days of interviews that occur between February and March.
All right. Well, we're going to get in those details in a little bit about what your interview day kind of looks like and what applicants can expect. I wanted to ask, do you think the timeline wise, are most of your friends in the other provinces along the same similar timelines, like starting in July and closing at the beginning of October?
Most of the other schools are similar timelines because they don't. The other provinces don't have a centralized provincial application system like we do in Ontario. That's all individual. So their individual dates or deadlines may differ, but we do like to try and be aligned with when offers are going out so nobody's jumping the gun. And it's a very difficult thing for students if they really want to come to, let's say the University of Toronto, and they have an offer from another school that gives them a 5-day deadline to respond that doesn't overlap with our offer time. So they get totally conflicted. Do I take a chance? Do I just accept it? So we try and align, but they're not all aligned day by day across the country, but they are in Ontario.
What about, do students that are in a province tend to apply to the med school within the province, or do most Canadian applicants apply across all the med schools in Canada and hope for the best? Is there any in-province, out-of-province preferences or quotas?
Right, that's a great question. So for many of the other provinces they have provincial, out-of-province limits, and also they probably have some out-of-country limits. But for University of Toronto, we don't have any provincial or out-of-province quotas, and so it doesn't really matter if you're from Ontario or Quebec or British Columbia. Okay. And for international students, like for instance, some of the American students who apply, we do have some limits there. We have up to 10 international positions available in our medical class, which would be, sounds like a small number, but 10 positions is quite, we like it. It helps to diversify our class. It's not all just Canadians. So we have some Americans and people from Europe and other places of the world, and that just enhances the overall experience for the class.
Yeah, Jesse, before we kind of wrap up the overview of the application process, are there any other comments or tips that you come to mind that you think are important, or common questions you hear from applicants that you wanted to kind of put out there?
I think, just touching upon, again, the difference in our admission cycle dates, it's really important. So if you are, a U.S. student and thinking of applying to a school in Canada, just really be familiar with the timelines. Our offers of admission typically, would go out for Canadian students, they go out in May, always the second week of May. So it's very predictable, but it is later than, U.S. offers typically go out. So
Mm-hmm.
being aware of that, we do release our international offers a little bit earlier than that, usually by about mid-April.
Mm-hmm.
But just really familiarize yourself with that process and with the differences using the OMSAS application. And of course, if you're thinking of applying to other medical schools in Canada, look at their resources on their websites as well. Not all med schools in Canada will accept international candidates. So that's an important point. Only a select number do. So that's, if you are applying from outside of Canada, you'll want to make sure you're aware of those requirements.
So one similarity I'm hearing between U.S. applicants and Canadian applicants is, one thing is, you got to be organized. Wherever
Definitely.
you're applying, whether it's through AMCAS or OMSAS or provincial, or you have to be organized in this process. There's a lot of moving parts and things you need, deadlines and things you have to be aware of. So
I've actually heard some of our students refer to it as a part-time job.
Yeah.
Just the application process itself, right? Like really putting the research and time and organization into preparing those applications. It almost is like having a part-time job in that year you're applying.
Let me ask both of you, what's maybe one area in the application process that you see kids get tripped up on?
Well, it sounds silly, but it's deadlines. So unfortunately, we see applicants wait till the last minute, and then all of a sudden they're racing to upload their essays and their autobiographical sketch.
At 11:59.
At 11:59, and then there's a computer glitch, and it's never their fault. It's someone else's computer problem. And they did this and they did that, and now 2 days later, they're writing us impassioned letters asking for forgiveness, and it's very hard for us to do that. I jokingly said one day we should put the deadline at 4 a.m. because I'm pretty sure most students would put their application together by midnight or so and go to sleep. But it wasn't. The OMSAS people didn't think that was a great idea to have to staff that office at 4 a.m.
Jesse, what do you think? What have you seen an area that tends to common pitfall maybe that applicants run into?
I think references can be another challenge, is just really identifying who good references would be. So we do every year, despite the communication we put around references, we do see inappropriate references, like, from family members and friends and things like that. And then the other piece is that if you're an undergraduate student and you've attended a large university, often it's really hard for those students to find strong academic references that they feel are relevant, right? Like if they've always been in large lecture-based classes and things like that. So we always, advise students to think about references early and try to really form those relationships and make connections early on so that they are able to, obtain a strong academic reference and someone that can really speak to their characteristics, not just as, a student in a large class, but someone that they actually knew and oversaw their work and interacted with regularly.
Yeah. Well, then we've kind of set the stage here this is the general overview. Oh, one more quick question. Is there an advantage to applying early? Here in the US, we say apply early, get your stuff in June or July kind of thing. What about in Canadian medical schools?
No, we have a set deadline, and we don't start reviewing anything related to the application.
All right. I'm glad I asked that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So Dr. Ladder, we've kind of set the stage. Tell us why U.S. or international applicants should consider applying to medical schools in Canada. Why try to add that extra application process layer onto what they're doing maybe here in the U.S.?
Right.
Or why Toronto too?
Great question. So, there's lots of areas I can sort of go into to talk about that. But first of all, as Jesse pointed out, not all Canadian schools take international students. So any potential applicant would have to, make sure that they're dealing with a school that accepts international students. We clearly are one, and we're encouraging international students to apply because we think that will enhance our class, give some increased diversity. It also will, I think, serve University of Toronto well in the future when these students go back to where they came from, and they're now new ambassadors for University of Toronto. It's a two-way street. So we have these fantastic students that come here from elsewhere, and we give them an excellent education, and then they return and they are they are ambassadors. So why University of Toronto? We have lots of advantages here, lots of things that would make you want to come here. Our acceptance rate actually for our Canadian applicants when we send out our letters of offer is about 87%, which is very high.
Wow.
And these are students that, of course, many of these students get multiple offers at other schools, and 87% will, choose to come to U of T. I think part of that's because of the city that we live in. It's a big city. I think the population of
it's the largest in Canada.
It's largest in Canada, fourth largest in North America.
Wow.
I think it's like 2.7 million in just Toronto proper, and then the GTA is about 6 million, I think. And there's lots of things to do. The school itself is a very large school. We have 259 domestic seats and 10 international seats. And they get an education across the city we have 11 teaching hospitals associated with the University of Toronto. So it's the only medical school in Toronto. And so it's a very large enterprise, and there's really something here. There's something here for everybody. If you're a scientist, you couldn't pick a better place to come and do your medical education here. We have just a massive research enterprise at U of T. And if you're, if you're a surgeon, or you have an interest in surgery, there's these transplant programs and hepatobiliary and cardiac and neurosurgery, and really multiple sites for all these things. And then, of course, if you're really a primary care physician type individual, and that's what you want to do, we have that too. We have dozens and dozens of community centers, hospitals, and practices that our primary care education takes place at. And so, really, I like to say there's something here for everybody, and I think it's true, and I think that's one of the things that attracts people.
Yeah, it's exciting. Let's take it to the next step and talk about those curricular highlights. So when medical students get to the University of Toronto, when you're meeting prospective applicants, what are some of those couple highlights about those first 2-year experiences that you want them to take away, and be like, oh, that sounds really cool. I'm excited to apply here.
Jesse, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So we actually have recently been through a curriculum renewal. We launched our new foundations curriculum, which is what we call the first 2 years of our program. That was launched in 2016, so it's still relatively new. And sort of the major changes and innovations that were brought into the new program were really a move away from the sort of larger lecture-based learning model and more into the small group model. So I think a lot of med schools have gone in this direction as well. I think some of the highlights really in our curriculum are we try to create themed curriculum models. So there'll be a series of themes that are taught throughout first and second year, all relating to, the human body and issues within medicine and the basic sciences. And our curriculum is really set up so that students are interacting with those themes in many different ways. So we have a focus on case-based learning, where students are working in small groups twice a week. The first session they have is really a student-led case-based session, followed up by one that's faculty-led, where they have a preceptor working through the cases with them. We have anatomy, of course. It's still part of the first and second year curriculum. So students participate in that usually for a half day every week. And then I think one of the great features is how we've integrated clinical skills into the first 2 years. So we have the curriculum component is called the Integrated Clinical Experience, or ICE, we call it for short.
Oh, yeah, ICE. I read about that.
Yeah, and that happens over 2 half days per week. And essentially it's small groups, again, of about 6 students where they'll be in clinical settings, learning a lot of the basic patient interaction, taking a patient's history, physical exams, things like that, within the actual clinical sites. And then there's a second component where they are basically looking at working with standardized patients. Mm-hmm. So they do some work here around more complex cases. There's some shadowing that's involved in the ICE curriculum as well that is a bit more student-led. So students have the opportunity to choose some of their placements there. Mm-hmm. And then another big feature is just a bigger emphasis on unscheduled time for students. Every first year student has their Wednesday off completely. They have classes and clinical placements on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then Wednesday is sort of like a free day for them to do shadowing, to, study, catch up on sleep, whatever they need in that given week. That time is really theirs to protect. And then the same thing is replicated in second year. So they have a free day as well as part of their second year curriculum.
Oh, that's great. What's been the so this was implemented in 2016. We're a couple of years into that. What's been the feedback that you've kind of heard from among the students? Like just kind of maybe, not something official, but just passing by. Heard some comments?
Yeah, I think that I think it's been overwhelmingly positive. I think that, with any new curriculum, we're very invested in getting feedback from the students that are now in the curriculum. So they're constantly having check-ins with students and looking at what features they really like and what they need to be changed a little bit and so on. But I think the small group approach has been very positive as opposed to, having the larger lectures that we used to. And there's also a lot of what was previously covered in the lecture work is now put into online learning modules. So students really appreciate the opportunity to sort of learn at their own pace, where they can watch those lectures and prepare in advance of their on-site work, or they can reflect on it on their day off and come back to it. So it's really more self-directed, and students seem to appreciate that flexibility.
So it sounds like the case-based piece or the small group piece, they're required to come in for that, for those sessions. But otherwise, there's some flexibility if they want to come in for a lecture, or they can watch the lectures online. Am I capturing that correctly?
Yeah, for the lectures, that's true. They have the opportunity to watch it as well. But then as outside of just the scheduled lecture, there is some supplementary reading and material that's provided online, which they usually get at the beginning of each week to kind of supplement the coursework they're doing during the week.
The interesting thing about this, Christian, is that the theme for the week or the next 2 weeks, perhaps, let's say it's renal disease. And so the students are getting information on renal disease from multiple sources. And it also makes it a bit, that their actual experience is all around the renal disease. So for instance, they may have a session where they're learning clinical skills with a nephrologist and learn about how to examine a patient with renal disease and what's relevant. And at the same time, around the same time, their anatomy lectures will be about, the anatomy of the kidney and the nephron and the urological system. And then their case-based learning case would probably likely be would be about a patient with renal disease of some sort that they go through learning about this case, and they're getting information about the anatomy and physiology at the same time in lectures, and then so it's all coming together and it makes sense. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just an abstract nephron that they're learning about. They're actually learning about how this is relevant to people with kidney disease.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, at the end of the week or the 2-week period, there's a little examination to make sure that they've synthesized that information, that they've caught it, hasn't passed them by.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't do well in that exam, it's not they're not punished. They're aware they've got to go back and learn this concept that they seem to have missed, so that there's no the knowledge gaps get filled immediately or as soon as possible, and not allowed to disappear forever, and not be aware of this knowledge gap. So we think it helps their learning experience.
Yeah, when you put your clinician hat, when you take your admissions hat on and put on your clinician hat, why is that clinical or that educational structure important? How does that compare to the way you trained when you were in medical school? And what do you see now as like why this is a big advantage?
Well, one thing this really does rely on the student being a bit of a self-starter and self-directed learning, because no one's going to sit there and tell them, well, you didn't come to the lecture, so you failed. If you don't go to the lecture and you don't read the material and you don't study, it's going to be basically on you. But we're going to know about it because of the assessments, the formative assessments that go along with each section. But we're looking for students that are self-directed learners. It's certainly very prominent in our admissions profiles that we're trying to identify, values that we see, characteristics that we see in the applicants that are desirable, because that's what's really going to, that's the kind of student that's really going to thrive in this curriculum. And we think it makes them healthier, happier individuals when they have more control over their own educational timelines or experiences.
What's the grading system like in the first 2 years? You said there's some examinations that occur every week or every couple of weeks whenever that theme is kind of winding down. What's that look like?
Well, overall it's a pass-fail system.
Okay.
But they do get individual marks on their exams, so they know just how strong or how how weak they may be, so they know where to put their efforts in. So it's not that they're not blind by not knowing what they don't know. It gets identified for them.
What are some other things students are getting involved in those first couple of years? Jesse, you said they get these Wednesdays kind of open, and they can catch up on sleep or do other things. What do you see students getting involved in if it's not academic?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a few major things that we see students doing. So one would be shadowing. I think even though it is sort of academic related still, they want to use this opportunity to really see the different types of medical care that's happening and the type of specialty they may be interested in going into, right? So it's never too early to kind of start that process. So a lot of students do that. Research is another big one.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. So research it's not something that's mandatory for all of our students to get involved with, but being that we are a large research institution, we do tend to attract a lot of students that have a keen interest in research. So many of them will use that unscheduled time to do research, and they might do it through the formal research programs we have. Or they might do it through more self-directed student opportunities. And then the third thing I would say is to get involved in some of the clubs and student groups. So so I mean, U of T, again, it's a big institution. I think at the university itself, we have over 1,000 student clubs. So there really is something for everyone, as David mentioned. But outside of that, just even within medicine, there's a lot of different types of clubs students can get involved with, everything from, student politics to getting involved in more outreach or working with underserved populations. We actually have a student-run clinic here in Toronto that our students help support, called the Imagine Clinic. So this Wednesday tends to be a time that students can pursue those interests as well.
Something else we haven't talked about is you have two campuses. One in Toronto, the main campus is in Toronto, and the other one's a little bit farther away. And I'm going to butcher this. Mississauga.
Yeah.
Mississauga. Okay.
Mississauga. Yeah. So
very good.
There's a lot of S's in there. So yeah, we have our main downtown Toronto campus, which has, been around for many, many years now. But our Mississauga campus opened in 2011. So it's still relatively, I should say the medical program opened on that campus in 2011. So it's relatively new out there, but it is a really, it's a beautiful campus. It's set on protected green space. It's, there's a river that runs through it. It's quite lovely. Still very much an urban setting, and that Mississauga is, I think it's the 6th largest city in Canada. So it's quite large, and fantastic partner hospitals out there as well. So we do, through our admissions process, we admit 259 Canadian students plus the up to 10 international seats. Mm-hmm. And we tend to place about 54 students on that Mississauga campus.
Oh, so do they do their first two? Did they do all 4 years out of that campus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So really that campus completely houses all of their needs in terms of their lectures, and there's anatomy labs out there as well, and so on. And then their clinical opportunities in 3rd and 4th year often revolve around the Mississauga area hospitals. Now there is some opportunity to, take electives and so on at other hospitals across our U of T network, but most of their clinical work will be based around the hospitals affiliated to that campus.
Do accepted applicants submit a preference to which campus they want to go to, or does the school say you're going there and you're staying here? How does that?
Yes. Yeah. So there is an opportunity for them to indicate their preference, and that happens after interviews. Okay. So it's actually, they come for an interview, they complete their campus preference survey, and then when they receive an offer from us, it is tied to one of the two campuses. Okay. So we do our best to match people with their first choice campus, but whatever their offer might be will be tied to the specific campus they're placed at.
David, a common question that we get from applicants oftentimes is about global opportunities. Do medical students at Toronto get the opportunity or time to do something internationally if they want to?
Oh yeah, most definitely. So not so much during the first and second year, which are sort of foundational years, although they do have what we call enriching educational experience, which is a career exploration sort of component of our ICE program. And they can sort of go around the city a little bit. But for global electives, so once they get into their clerkship, they have elective time, and those electives can occur pretty much anywhere as long as we accept that it's a bona fide medical school or hospital that the experience is being sought at. They also have, so those are electives. During basically clerkship electives, I guess, and then after clerkship and the end of sort of during their final year, they have something we call selectives.
Okay,
which also is it's limited in scope and exactly what you can do. You can't do 4 different electives in cardiac surgery, for instance, and because you want to become a cardiac surgeon, you have to do a sort of a variety of experiences that we think enhance the educational experience of the student. But it can be definitely out of country, and so we encourage students, and many of them go to the U.S., especially if any of our students who might be interested in residency in the United States, they take those opportunities to get that
away things. Okay,
exactly, and that includes Canadians that might want to do residency in the United States, so they can do an elective or multiple electives elsewhere.
What other countries do they tend to visit? Do you have relationships with some other? I'm sure you have gobs of them. Yeah. Are there some of the most popular destinations?
We have number of opportunities at clinics and whatnot in Africa and Nepal. It's a lot of it with the students. They reach out to one of our neurosurgeons has a neurosurgical clinic that he runs in Nepal every couple of months, and he takes students with him. And so there's quite a few opportunities like that.
Wow. Just to kind of wrap up, I mean, this has been really, this is cool to hear the similarities and differences in the things that you offer. One thing I wanted to ask about is the licensing examination that students have to take in Canada. It was called the
MCCQE.
MCCQE.
A lot of letters for you.
So what's the timing on that?
Yeah, so the MCCQE, it's again a bit of a different timeline than the US MLEs. So our students are taking part one of that exam in their final year of medical school. So really toward the end of that final year. So they're not having to prepare for anything partway through the degree program. And then the second part of the exam is written during residency. So one thing to note, if students are interested in having the opportunity to go to the US as well, potentially for residency, our students would be eligible to do that and to apply for residency in the US through ARS and whatnot. But they will have to, of course, write the US MLE. So that's something that students coming from the US that are wishing to go back, or even our Canadian students that would like to kind of keep the option open of going to the US, they would have to prepare for that around the same timelines as US students would. So they would be looking at, studying and preparing to write that after second year.
Right. So do you have resources for students at the university there to help guide students through this?
Yeah, we have our student affairs office. It's called the Office of Health Professions and Student Affairs. It's a bit of a long title, so we call them OPSA. They have academic and career counselors that work with all of our students around, their plans going forward. And anyone that's thinking of doing residency in the US or outside of Canada especially we would recommend that they go and see those counselors early in their program, like even in first year, just to get a bit of advice around the steps and the timelines. And then our counselors can help them with that process. They can help, connect them to other students that are also planning to apply to the US so that they might have, study partners and things like that. And then if they do kind of move forward in the process and plan to apply for residency in the US in their fourth year, that team again can really help them with understanding the differences between applying to a Canadian residency versus a US residency, because there are some major differences in the types of recommendation letters and electives or experiences that might be assessed in the US that would be different from how the Canadian residency system works here in Canada.
David, just to kind of wrap things up before we get into the really juicy stuff about what you're looking for in applicants, you've been there a while now. What's some of those common myths or misconceptions you've heard about Toronto or the University of Toronto that you like to dispel?
Well, I think the first one is that we're just a massive research institution, because that may be true, but that's not all that we are. The university and the faculty is quite proud of our ranking in the world list of medical schools. I think, Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we ranked number 6, just behind Johns Hopkins and just in front of Stanford, or vice versa, something like that.
It was pretty high from what I saw.
So, we're proud of that. And a lot of that's due to the accomplishments of our scientific research at the university. But that's not the only thing that this place is about. And, when I walk around the space outside my office here at the university, it's an incredibly diverse community. Toronto itself is an incredibly diverse community, but the medical school is as well. And we see, very bright, motivated, ambitious young students pursuing just a multitude of different opportunities. And so, really, I think we can probably meet everybody's, ambitions and goals in one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And we spend a lot of time making sure that we do that. And, we have different programs. We have an MD PhD program. We have some of our students do a combined master's in clinical epidemiology in the MD degree. We've had students go work and do masters in humanities, sort of simultaneously with medical degrees, or concomitant, not simultaneously, but along the way. So there's just something available for most people's or all people's interest, and I think we have, as a result, we have a very very interesting student body that stimulates each other, and they seem to be pretty happy. There's lots of interest groups. They have special interest groups that they participate in. The students are amazingly creative. They have something called Daffodil, which is a student-led theater production that is used to raise money for charity. That is just off the charts caliber. You can't believe these students.
These are medical students.
Yeah, they're concert pianists and singers, and it's a bit embarrassing for me because I'm so deficient in comparison. So I think that's the myth that we're kind of a boring science place, and we're not at all like that.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like you have the resources to appeal to a lot of different needs and interests, and students can satisfy them at your institution. That's awesome. Right. Well, okay, so now the question is, so how does someone get into your school? What are you looking for? That's the most common question that we get. Jesse, you and I were talking a little bit beforehand about CanMeds. You were helping me understand what CanMeds is, and then how that plays a role in your admissions process.
Yeah. So CanMeds is essentially, it's a framework. It's a national framework for training physicians here in Canada. So I believe it started in the 90s in terms of the development of this framework. And it all came out of asking the public what they valued in a good physician. So a number of competencies and roles have been kind of designed to fulfill what we call the medical expert here in Canada. So the reason this is important to our conversation is that we actually identified 4 of the CanMeds competencies, I guess, essentially, and integrated them into our admissions process. So one of the most common questions I think we get, and probably all med school admissions teams get, is, what are you looking for in a good applicant? GPA and MCAT score aside, what is it that you want to see in my autobiographical sketch and my essays and so on? So we have pulled out these 4 clusters, and they focus around basically professional qualities, communication, collaboration, and manager or leader qualities, advocacy skills, and scholarly achievements. So there's a lot of detail, of course, in our admissions materials on these 4 clusters, but these are things that we're really looking to assess, especially in your non-academic components of your application. So when you're thinking about, the types of activities you should get involved with, or, how to showcase your work experience, or what you've gained out of your work or volunteer experience, or if you've done research or received awards, these are all things that you're telling us about in your application. And we always encourage applicants to keep these 4 clusters in mind to really ensure that you are covering off all 4 of these areas within your materials. So this is a way that we can kind of gauge your suitability and, how you'll perform as a medical student and what kind of qualities you bring into the program.
Do you look for, since you put a lot of value in these 4 clusters, or competency clusters. Are you then looking for one of those meaningful experiences that's been elaborated on, where they get the 250 additional characters to maybe meet one or more of those 4 clusters?
Yeah. So we want to see really all 4 clusters covered off in your application material on a whole. But we kind of drill it down to every component of the application as well. So if you are submitting, as you are required to, 3 references to us, across those 3 references, all 4 of those clusters should sort of be touched upon. So it can help to guide candidates in thinking about who they want to ask to be their references, what types of activities they want to, like you said, elaborate on from their autobiographical sketch. So choosing things that is going to help showcase things like their communication skills or their advocacy work or interest in advocacy, their professionalism and so on. So these are things that, really they should be highlighting across all of those additional pieces of the application.
Glad you're tying those all together. I think that then helps make some sense to people. And then it's important to you also because you use these clusters are then integrated into your curriculum. So it's not just a value that you're looking for at the admissions level, but it also then carries through the curriculum. And so I think that's so for people to hear, like, why are they doing this 4 cluster thing? It's a part of the curriculum as well.
Yeah, and it's actually is a subset of our CanMed roles, which are very prominent in our postgraduate education programs here in Canada. So that it's not just being a medical expert to be a good doctor. You have to be able to communicate and collaborate and advocate and all those things. So it's a theme that runs throughout the medical education in Canada, from admission to undergrad to postgrad.
What about something I found that Toronto has some GPA and MCAT requirements? Do you want to talk a little bit about that and why that's in place?
Yeah. So so I don't know where to start. GPA. Let's start with the GPA. So we get we have all of our students that are applying. They're very good students, obviously, and they have great ambition, and they want to become doctors. And so we have to start making judgment calls on who's actually going to be selected. And so we use these tools, and 2 of the tools that we happen to use are GPA and MCATs. And there's lots of controversy that surrounds GPAs and lots of controversy that surrounds MCATs. But in the end of the day, I think we still have to use some sort of measurement of academic performance to make some informed decisions about medical school admission. So that's what that falls onto the GPA and the MCAT. Our GPA, we publish in our website what our average GPA is of our incoming class, and it's extremely high, and sometimes it's a bit daunting. It is a weighted GPA, so we have some method of people who have taken the full course load can choose to have their lowest class or their lowest mark removed from the GPA calculation. Okay. So it's not a direct hard GPA that you do setting up all your classes, but we're changing that a little bit in the future because we want to make it fair. We didn't allow students that had taken part-time or less than not part-time, but less than a full course load to be able to weight their GPA that way. And some students, particularly students who have some social economic obstacles in front of them, it may be very difficult to take a five course full course load when you have to work at the grocery store on the evenings and the weekends to help pay for school. So maybe it's more realistic and appropriate to only take 4 courses. So we are making some changes in how we actually calculate the weighted GPA, but in the end, it's a pretty high bar. We say that the minimum GPA for an application U of T is 3.6, and that's the weighted GPA, and that's really to be competitive. It's really closer to 3.8 or 3.8 something as a weighted GPA competitive mark. So that can be a little bit daunting for many students. There's some very many good students out there who have a tough time meeting that bar, but that's what the reality is here.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have some issues sometimes with GPA from one undergraduate school may not be exactly the same as a similar GPA from another undergraduate school, and how do we balance that? Is it, it's a lot. I'm sure you have the same issues at Case Western and everywhere. So we struggle with that, but we haven't found a better system yet.
Yeah.
So we're still working on that.
Well, I'm just glad that you're open about talking about it. I mean, it is what it is. It's an institutional decision. And I think it's just nice just to at least be open and say, this is how we do it. And this is what we're looking for. And it's tough. But we have a job to do, and you guys know what you're looking for in your candidates and why you have to do that. When it comes to medically related experiences, I've heard down here in the US that it's harder for Canadian students to get access to shadowing physicians and getting medically related experiences just because some of the institutional bureaucracies or policies are different than it can be here in the US. How do you value those as administrators in admissions in Canada? Do you value those medically related experiences or put some expectations on them?
Yeah, well, I have to say I don't particularly put a lot of value into shadowing experiences. I mean, I think it's a value to the student if they're exploring. Do they have an interest in medicine, and how profound that interest might be, and in what area of medicine. So for self exploration, I certainly see how shadowing experiences can be helpful. Do I give an applicant who puts in their autobiographical sketch that for 10 different sessions they shadowed 3 different doctors at such and such a hospital, versus somebody who hasn't done that or only done 1 or 2? Not really, because I don't think that really helps us to define who's a stronger applicant. Okay. So, and you're right. In Canada, sometimes because of privacy laws, we don't have non-medical students running around our operating rooms or our clinics in the hospital. Yeah. I think in private offices, in physicians' offices, you can do that, but not so easy to do in the hospital level for privacy issues. So there is some there are limits to what students can get in terms of experiences like that.
So how does an applicant then express their interest in medicine and wanting to go to medical school in the application if they're not showing it through their actions? What do you like to read, or what do you like to read that gives you like that, okay, they get this feeling?
Yeah. Well, as you know, you just don't decide at the end of 4th year that you want to apply for medical school and do it. It's a process. And, generally speaking, that process, the earlier it starts, the better, and more likely the student, the applicant will be successful. And so we do have some opportunities for, we actually have something we call community of support, which is, we have people here at the University of Toronto who students in high school even or undergraduate can reach out and they say, I think I'm interested in medicine, but I don't have any contacts. They may be coming from inner city and they just don't have that capital, that social capital, where they can reach out and find things and get experience in someone's research lab or work in someone's clinic as a volunteer. They just don't have those opportunities. So we actually do help some of those students with those opportunities and advise them. So there are abilities for some of these students to get that experience and demonstrate their interest. But really, there's someone doesn't have to be shadowing in the operating room to tell me that they're interested in medicine. They can be volunteering in a wellness center or anywhere. Just show us who you are, show us your commitment, show us that you're caring, Your transcripts, your GPAs, your MCATs will show us how, that you're smart enough. And then we're going to look for these sort of clustered attributes, and hopefully we make some right choices.
I was just going to say, it sounds like you guys come back to the clusters, that CAN meds. I'm looking at it right now. There's health advocate, leader, collaborator, communicator, professional, scholar, and it all kind of does that Venn diagram around medical expert.
Correct.
And so that's where it seems like, because of a slightly different systems, this is why you lean toward those CAN meds clusters. That makes sense.
100%. And Chris, I think that, the students who are successful students and then successful doctors they have to be smart enough. There's no question about that. But, where people fall down more in professional life, it's more around their professionalism and their ability to communicate and their empathy. And, it's these, you might call them soft characteristics, but they're essential for a really effective medical professional. So
true.
So that's sort of what we recognize that early. We look for that in our applicants, and hopefully we also teach it in our students. And it goes throughout the learning experience.
Jesse, can I ask you, coming from David was saying that Toronto is known as a research intensive institution, and I'm at one of those too. And a common question that we get, as well as my peers at other big research institution, is, do I have to have research on my application to be competitive at your institution? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the most common questions we get. And really the answer is no. And I think students have trouble believing that, but everyone thinks they need to demonstrate some research, but we have
really
sort of
mean no.
We have a scholar cluster, right? So there's more than just research that fits under that. So I think students can only often think of research as the way to demonstrate that. So we try to let them know that there's other ways through, awards, social responsibility related to, their academic work and so on, that can help demonstrate that scholar cluster. And also we recognize, I think there probably previously in our admissions process years ago, there was more of an emphasis on research. But knowing now the landscape of research and just how hard it is to get publications as an undergraduate student and to really do anything significant in that way, it's really challenging. It's even challenging for graduate applicants to get, well-recognized publications. So research, if they do want to present it, is great, but it's not a firm requirement for us. And we're not specifically measuring for research in the way of, first author publications or anything that specific. We would be looking at, if they worked in a research lab or if they, did some poster presentations around their research. Like, that's all things that could fall under the scholar cluster as well.
And I think Jesse, that's a beautiful way to describe it. And it's not that I wouldn't say we discount it. It's definitely not discounted. We love people who have research experience, and we think it contributes to their development as a professional, as a doctor, and particularly, of course, if they want to go into our MD PhD program, they better show a lot of that. But and about a quarter of our applicants actually come out of graduate programs, either master's and or PhD. So. Maybe it's not quite a quarter, more like 20%, I think, but it's not an insignificant number. So we do have lots of science in our student, scientists in our student body, and but it's not an absolute requirement.
I will hope people go back and just listen to the last about 2 minutes of what we've been talking about here, and let it sink in that both of you are saying that you value research, but it's not required, and you're not looking for first author publications. I mean, there's a lot of this myth and misconception out there about what schools value in research, and that sounds like you define research very broadly. That's scholarly work, and you can achieve that in other ways. And so I just I think some people I don't know who they're talking to or what they're kind of go back and listen to the last 2 minutes. You've heard just two people from the Toronto admissions team tell you exactly how you can achieve that scholarly, area in other ways. It's, I hear it too. I just,
okay.
I'm glad we're all experiencing the same sort of commonalities of the anxieties of the students.
Sometimes they put way too much pressure on themselves when they say, "Do I need to have first author publications?" I'm like, no, you're an undergrad. Your job is to go to school. This is like icing on the cake kind of stuff. And you don't get great data. That's okay. It's okay. They think they need to be, producing just incredible work right out of the gate. And sometimes they can, sometimes that's the way research goes, right?
100%.
Ah, geez. So, what about, we've made it through this pass in this screening. You guys have said, yes, your thumbs are up on them and the interview days are coming. We talked a little, we opened up, we said you have 5 or 6 interview days where it sounds like your whole weekend's now going to be revolving around your admissions work coming up here. What's that interview day like when you're bringing in 120 people this Saturday to come visit University of Toronto medical faculty? No, it's called the Faculty of Medicine. What happens? What's going down?
Yeah, so it's a really exciting day. Obviously a lot of nerves for applicants, but I also think it's one of the things we really emphasize around our interview day and the structure of our interviews is that it's not just about us choosing you as an applicant. It's about you choosing the university, right? And this is often the one chance that we really get to showcase the U of T community to our applicants, especially for those that are coming from outside of the Toronto area, across Canada, international, and so on. So we do integrate a lot of connection with our current students during these days. Great. So the format essentially is it's divided into half days. So we'll bring 60 candidates in for the morning session, for instance, and we'll start it off by doing a student presentation. And then we have interview cycles that roll through. And then it's also complemented by a tour of some of the hospital facilities close by, as well as sort of a post-interview chat around financial resources, campus selection, and some details around our academies. So we didn't really talk about academies, but that's a way that we kind of create communities within our medical program.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get through this.
Yeah. So the format of the interview itself is called the Modified Personal Interview, or the MPI.
Okay. And
it's unique to U of T. It's quite common now here in Canada for the MMI to be used. And the MPI is sort of like an interesting hybrid almost of like a panel interview and an MMI type of style. But it's a series of 4 interview stations, and they're one-on-one interviews that last approximately 12 minutes each. They are more of a personalized interview approach to what you find in an MMI structure, in that they are asking questions that, may pull in facets of the applicant's application materials. They'll have opportunities for the applicants to be reflective, to, think critically and answer the questions posed to them, but they're quite conversational.
Okay, so they have access to parts of the application.
Yes.
Okay,
select parts of the application.
Okay. Well, limited.
Limited, yeah.
Very limited, yeah.
So it doesn't
they know
include
enough kind of about the applicant coming in. This is not a stranger coming through the door. They know maybe a little bit of background.
They may, depending on the interview station, they may have some background. We'll never release, GPA or academic background or anything like that. It might just be very small attributes from their application. But there'll be a set of questions at each station that will be asked to the candidate, and it will, again, be more conversational. So it's not really acting or prompt based in the way that an MMI is. It is more conversational. Each of our stations does revolve around like a specific theme, which we don't really release. But again, we talk about looking at those clusters that we focus on in our application materials. And then there's an opportunity for candidates to ask questions back to our interviewers at the end of the 12 minutes. We usually try to leave a minute or two at the end so that there can be some back and forth there as well.
Cool. And then the day kind of wraps up. Are both of you there for the interview days?
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So the people listening might eventually meet you someday, I guess, as you might have some fans.
Most likely. So
yes.
It's a pretty interesting morning or a pretty interesting afternoon. And, the students are all there. They're incredibly nervous, and their minds are going at 100 miles an hour. And I try and sort of just, have them sort of calm down a little bit.
Yeah.
And then they go off to depending on which group they're in, they go off to their cycle of 4 interviews. And we spend a lot of time trying to train we do spend a lot of time training our interviewers to make sure that they're giving the absolute best opportunity for the applicants to show themselves. We don't expect them to answer a complex question with a 10-point outline in 2.5 seconds flat, but to come up to start speaking. So, but it is semi-structured, and we have questions that we give to each interviewer so that each applicant is getting a similar interview experience, but not identical, obviously. And then we want to make sure that the rating of each interview is done in as fair a way as possible. And that's hard to do when you have multiple different interviewers. But by having 4 separate interviews for each applicant, we've increased the number of data points, I guess, if you will, as an assessment of their interview performance. And we think it works pretty well, actually. And the students, the applicants report a fairly favorable experience from the interview day itself.
Yeah, I suppose they could say, maybe you didn't feel like you performed in your tip-top shape for the first station, but you made up for it in stations 2, 3, and 4.
Exactly.
Yeah, maybe the first one you're a little nervous on, and you realized, okay, this is not scary stuff. I just need to be relaxed a little bit, and then I can make it up in some other stations. So I think that's a nice approach. What are some of your general tips for helping students prepare? Do you have any, when you're out talking to prospective students or pre-meds on campus, and you say, hey, we got an interview day coming up. If they say, well, what should I do to prepare? Is there anything that you kind of share with them to kind of put their minds at ease?
Yeah, we do. I think everyone has probably very similar advice, regardless of the interview style you conduct, is just practice. Practice is like the biggest thing with interviews. Ask family members and friends and so on to ask you questions and so on. Familiarize yourself with your application materials. When you're submitting your application materials at the beginning of October, and then your interview might not be until March, reread what you wrote in there, refresh your mind a little bit. It's a good idea to be up to date on sort of current events, what's going on. And, a lot of our current students talk about how they would try to read sort of the front page of relevant newspaper sections, or just try to keep up to date on current affairs, especially things that might be concerning, the healthcare system in general. I think we have on our website, we have a blog post around preparing for the MPI format interview. We also are pretty active on Facebook, and we just recently did a Facebook Live session at the end of January to talk about with a couple of our current students, talking about how to prepare for interviews. So there's some resources there that students, if they're interested, can check out online.
I'll put some links to those. Is the Facebook group open? Is it just an open?
Yeah,
Facebook?
It's an open Facebook group, and we try to do a Facebook Live session about every 6 weeks to 2 months around, where we're at in the admission cycle and common questions and so on. So it's a really good resource.
Go ahead.
those resources are, they're quite helpful. And as Jesse said, this idea about practicing, it's not that you're going to be able to practice with a specific answer to a specific question that might come your way. It's just learning to be comfortable sitting in front of somebody else, telling them how you feel about an issue or how you organize your thoughts about a concept, and that takes practice, and so that's time well spent. I have seen students prepare specific answers to a perceived or likely specific question, and it often goes very badly. Because they forget item number 3, and now they're just in panic mode because their questions, their answers falling apart. And we also don't like, or I don't like seeing, just an expression of buzzwords in a certain topic that without much without much evidence of understanding what the issues really are. So I tell students, calm down, relax, take a deep breath, be interested, and be interesting. And it's the interviewers are there to give you an opportunity to share your points of view, and if we like that, and your points of view are interesting and well thought out and cogent, then that's going to do very well for you in the interview process.
Yeah, I heard both of you say practicing is important, and I'm 100% with you. I think it's one thing to think about what you'd say in your head, but it's another thing to actually articulate those thoughts. And that's where practicing, because organizing and articulating can be two different things, and sometimes they become detached. When you get nervous and your mouth is dry and your pulse is racing and it doesn't go as planned. So you're absolutely right in practicing, just having people ask you general questions. Just to kind of wind things down here. So after the interview day concludes, and can applicants, since deadlines in October, interviews come up now in February, can they bring updates with them? Do you accept application updates if they did get that publication, or if they did get some cool award that is special to them? Do you accept those, or are you pretty happy with what you have already in the application?
We're pretty happy with what we have. I mean,
it sounds pretty exhaustive.
It's pretty exhaustive, and the students just fret about this so much already as it is. If it's an endless sort of race to continue to improve your CV, I don't think it's very constructive. And one more publication is not going to make the difference between who you are before and after that publication. So we don't. It's not necessary, and we just we don't bother with.
I'm glad that you said that. I hope people kind of heard that again too. It's the publication is not going to change who you are before or after.
It's really your whole body of work that counts, right?
Yeah. After admissions committee, then you send out your acceptances. Jesse touched on this in the timeline. It sounds like for international applicants, it's around mid-April-ish. And then it sounds like for the rest of the cohort, it's shortly into May at some point.
Second week of May, yeah.
Real quick, Jesse, before I want to talk about Toronto real quick, and then we'll wrap things up. But tell us about the academies. You mentioned that.
Sure.
And it's something we didn't touch on yet, but it sounds like something that's important to your institution.
Yeah, so we, because we have a larger medical program, and we have, about 205 or so students on our downtown campus, and then around 54 at the Mississauga, we divide our students into academies. So it's kind of, you may know a similar system like a college system that some undergraduate programs offer, but essentially like a home base for that group of students in terms of where some of their small group learning sessions happen in first and second year, as well as where most of their clinical experiences will happen. Okay. So at our downtown campus, we have 3 academies. They all have names that we don't expect students to memorize. They're named after physicians. So the Whiteman Barris Academy, the Fitzgerald Academy, and the Peters Boyd Academy. And then in Mississauga, we have our Mississauga Academy of Medicine. And they're all connected to a group of hospitals, and students will again do most of their clinical work at those hospitals. But they're not prohibited from accessing other hospitals, just because of, the academy they're assigned to.
Mm-hmm.
They do have the opportunity, especially once they're into their electives and so on, to have experiences at hospitals outside of their specific academy affiliated hospitals. In Toronto, we have a lot of large research hospitals and sort of world-renowned hospitals such as Sick Kids, our children's hospital, the Center for Mental Health and Addiction. We have Princess Margaret, which is a big cancer research hospital. Those are known more as our specialty hospitals, and students in all of the academies will have some access to opportunities at those hospitals as well.
Wow. Sounds like a great way of organizing things. And
it just creates a bit of a smaller community within, a larger medical program.
Yeah. Okay. So you're in Toronto. It's the largest city in Canada. I've heard the cost of living there is a little high in Toronto. Where do students live? How do they find affordable housing?
It is. So,
If that's true. Well, most of the students who are at the downtown campuses will live downtown.
Okay.
And the cost of an apartment is not cheap. We encourage room sharing or having a roommate. It reduces the overall cost to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we don't provide housing for them. We have resources that we will send them to help them. But most students can get by with, they have access, of course, to lines of credits and hopefully get some parental support, and sometimes they get bursaries. And we have a fairly robust financial assistance program. Unfortunately, that would be mainly available just to the Canadian students. But
of course.
Any merit-based awards is certainly available to any of our students, international or Canadian.
Great. What do you guys like to do in Toronto? Jesse, what's some of your favorite things to do? Or if I'm coming to visit Toronto, you're like, Christian, we got to take you here. Tell me your personal ones first.
Yeah. So my favorite things about the city is it's a big city, but it's a city of neighborhoods. It's like there's all these little, especially neighborhoods that are sort of affiliated with specific cultures that are here in Toronto. As we mentioned, it's an extremely multicultural city. I think the statistic is close to 50% of the population was born outside of Canada. Wow. So really diverse, but you can go to every kind of restaurant you could imagine. You can explore, Little Italy, Koreatown, Chinatown. Right near my house is sort of the Greek village. So there's a lot of really great pockets of community, restaurants, arts, and entertainment that I think make it a really vibrant city.
What do you like to do though when you get some time?
So I have young kids, so we spend a lot of time going to playgrounds around the city. But personally, some of my interests would be I'm very interested in arts. Actually, my undergraduate degree was in fine art. So I like to visit galleries, and I'm involved with coordinating my local arts fair. So getting involved in sort of that side of things is a hobby of mine. Yeah.
David, how about you?
Well, Christian, if you came to visit us here in Toronto, I think you'd find it not unsimilar to Cleveland. Right now, it's snowing outside. We're expecting,
I thought it's usually sunny and about 70, 75 there. Exactly. That's what I've heard. Yeah.
We're expecting about 10 inches of snow, and people are quite excited about that because now, of course, that'll make for some great skiing this weekend up in Blue Mountain or Collingwood, which is a skiing community. It's about a couple hours north of the city. So if you were to come, I would take you skiing, or perhaps I'd take you over to Nathan Phillips Square, which is a rink right in front of our city hall, and I'd take you skating, outdoor skating, which is a lovely experience. So, it is winter here right now, but the winter is easing off, and I think most people who live in Toronto or live in Canada, for that matter, have to be willing to embrace the four seasons, because we truly have, a winter. We truly have, by the way, a very warm, hot summer. So we embrace the seasons. We ski and skate in the wintertime, and we play golf and soccer and baseball and whatnot in the summertime. So I would take you skating, I'd take you skiing, and of course I'd bring you to a Raptors game to watch the world champions play basketball here in Toronto. So
it took LeBron to leave Cleveland for the Raptors to become world champions.
100%, yeah. That is so true. That is so true. So
my son and I were happy to see the Raptors, finally hit the top of the mountain there, because they have some great teams.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds like fun. What is your favorite thing to do in Toronto, Dr. Latter?
Well, I'm a golfer, so in the summertime I'll definitely go golfing. My children are a little bit older than Bessie, so I'm no longer going to playgrounds. But I spent the last 10 years of my life at hockey rinks as a coach. I was an assistant coach for one son and the head coach for another son, and that was just a great deal of fun. People say, how can you spend all that time in cold rinks with your sons? And I said, well, I was with my sons, with my family. What better time could I have? So did a lot of that, and
outstanding.
So it's mainly sports activities, and of course because I work downtown in St. Michael's Hospital. At the end of the day, if it's a long day, I just call my wife up and ask her to meet me, and we go out to one of the 1,000 restaurants that I can walk to from the hospital.
Yeah. Oh, that's tremendous. Hey, you two, this has been really, it's been very entertaining, particularly educational for me. I mean, I think people that have been listening, it's been really interesting to see some of the similarities and some of the differences between our admissions processes, but also the things we all value in our prospective students. So I can't thank you enough. I've loved this opportunity to talk with you today. So thanks so much for doing this with me. It's been awesome.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Well, if I can make it up north sometime, I'm looking you guys up, because you sound like a lot of fun and I'd love to hang out with you. So thank you in person. So I hope to see you someday.
That'd be wonderful.
For sure.
All right. Thank you guys. Talk to you later.
Thank you, Christian.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.